Hi, welcome to Tales of Dread. Since Halloween is just around the corner, this is the start of our 8-part Halloween special. In this episode we'll hear about encounters with gargoyles, flying creatures and the Mothman. But first, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now let's get into it. My buddy Rick and I were traveling through Amarillo at sunset on our way to California from Chicago. On the second day, we took 40 west to 8th south, then down to Yuma. It passes through a lot of desolate, unpleasant desert, yet has wonderful vistas. The sky was stunning, the sunset orange-red-pink over the plain. As the stars came out, I could only see a 2-lane highway into nothing. Something about its beauty made me nervous. Maybe everyone's worried and depressed. We were traveling in the dark, unlit, abandoned I-4, we had petrol and food, but the great open sky above the desert made me feel insignificant. Our recordings were fine, but the drive was boring. We had left Phoenix an hour and a half earlier and were heading down Interstate 8. Then I realized we had gotten lost, looped around, and missed the off-ramp to Yuma. We needed petrol, lunch, and a break. As I fiddled with the chart, Rick pulled off the road and the vehicle flipped. I remarked, "I hope you didn't ground us in the desert sand ridge," then moved the vehicle forward, still on the shoulder. I left after giving Rick the map. Deep purple, bright desert night, I could see Yuma's glittering light in the distance. Rick stepped out of the vehicle, opened a Coke, and stated, "We'll get there." Unlike me, he was confident. Rick left the vehicle and I heard him pee. I glanced away from the automobile, away from Yuma's lights. I glanced back at the empty I-8, no vehicles. Beyond there, the stark shape of the sunlit desert under the full moon. As I headed back to the vehicle, I saw something incredible. I backtracked. It sat on a rock. Near the top was a gargoyle as on a Gothic church. I thought it was fascinating that someone carved such delicate beauty onto a generic rock. What a magnificent image on a lonely roadway in the desert at night, I nodded. I liked that image till it soared into the darkness. After that, everything blurred. Back to the vehicle. Rick didn't believe I grabbed him. Rick spotted it soaring beneath the moon and above us. Rick drove like a madman. Something flies across the windshield. Giant bat wings were perfect. That? Screamed. Rick agreed. Opinions. He and I told him that. Then something dark struck us. The automobile skidded into the sand. Rick started the vehicle again and the wheels were spinning. We looked about. "Okay, push, I'll shift," he said, and stepped back in the vehicle. Rick rolled back into the road, put the vehicle in neutral, and handed me the flashlight from the glove box. The automobile had no AC, so the windows were down. Rick urged me to beam the spotlight if we saw the monster again, but before we could roll, a large shadow dropped past the window where I was seated. The spotlight revealed a yellow-eyed, leather-faced, devil-horned gargoyle. I yelled, "Drive, drive, drive." We passed Yuma and reached Los Angeles. Desert life persists. Yuma, Arizona, 1995. I've seen some unusual and scary things in my life, some in the military, others in the terrible area where I grew up, but the worst was that night in the desert. In Arizona, we camped. We had a bonfire, played music, and relaxed. I drank like a fish and needed to empty the tanks. I moved north behind a rock formation and peed against it. As I was about to finish, I saw an orange flash above the hill, nearly indiscernible. I was preparing to go check what was happening on the hill. Lawrence was talking about Wendy, one of our pals, when he fell over to pee. I ignored his nonsense. What is that man's light over the hill? I told him something was shining over there. I recall he paused, sipped his drink, and pissed before saying, "Let's see." We began afresh as we walked over. He mumbles campfire isn't the only campus. We strolled for an hour, I said, and he whispered. Diane said it was private, so I replied softly. He rambled about Wendy. How can I get up with my lady if others are rushing us like in the mall? We climbed the hill and peered down. No bonfire. There was a fire-like light from a hole in the rocks leading to the ground. How? Lawrence. Nothing. What's that? A volcano? Unsure? If it's too hot, we'll get a thing. Lawrence continued muttering nothing but a thing as we walked near the bright hole. Repeatedly we climbed 30 feet down the slope. When we saw progress. Maybe it's like Old Faithful in Yellowstone, where Lawrence began bulging out stuff. We were both spellbound when he finished. Something emerged from the hole. It seemed like two closed golf umbrellas were being forced out of the hole, but they divided as they left the tunnel. Then two erect ram horns appeared between the opening umbrellas. We believed it was wildlife. We anticipated maybe cow hooves. Animals fleeing a cave fire. When a person sees something that makes no sense, they can only observe until something clicks, thus we saw the head become a human face. Long arms, claws, and fingers follow. It pulled itself out of the hole and the umbrellas opened. We ran. We didn't turn until we reached the campfire. We acted foolishly. Screaming and gasping. Lawrence grabbed a rock and said, "Go." The automobile was 45 minutes away, and nobody moved when we arrived. I grabbed a rock and stood beside Lawrence, who was hyperventilating. Go back to the vehicle. I'm not walking back now, BS. The females stopped sipping their drinks to gaze at us and giggle. You too? Wendy questioned. Satan. Satan. Lawrence stutter-backed. Darren's skepticism as he stood. What's up, jerks? Then we heard something crunching behind us. Why? Asks Darren. This came out of a hole. It was buried. Hellbent. Lawrence paused. You probably witnessed a Gila monster. Janine responded, let's get to the vehicle, and we heard another crunch. No guy, I'm telling you, you don't know, Darren yelled. We froze like mannequins in a retail display, waiting. The whooshing began then. The girls began collecting their belongings as he put her jacket in the lantern and Janine took the sleeping bag from the cooler. Then Darren reached for his bag when a rock fell from the heavens and smashed our bonfire. There were shouts and gasps. The flashlights came on, and Lawrence sprinted into the dark toward where he assumed the automobile was as ashes fell. Something was circling us. The girls were searching with flashlights when Janine's light landed on some red-black flesh flashing above us. We ran. We were terrified and walking sand. Talking helped us relax. Darren's reasoning helped. Wendy thinks it may be a large desert bat guarding its young. Darren discussed animals' territoriality. Darren jerked. He'd been struck. When I inquired whether he was all right, he said to keep going. Janine was hit. She shouted and shrugged. Jogging began. Wendy leaps and yells when anything falls on her like sticks. I'm bombarded. The torch is being whirled around when I hear snakes dropping from the sky. Darren lifted his leg and shined the spotlight. I saw a heap of rattlers. Nobody stayed to see whether they were Mojave rattlers or sidewinders. We rushed sobbing and leaping through the dark. I asked in the vehicle whether anybody had been bitten by Janine. Is there a local hospital? I didn't know, but if someone got bitten by a Mojave and ran for 15 minutes, they'd be dead in 10 minutes. I just knew we had to go quickly. We struggled down the hill to the vehicles when we noticed a large object fall on the opposite side. The creature squatted on the automobile. It was scary. It grew wings and stood. Horns and wings were seen. Lawrence began praying, begging Jesus for compassion. I recall swallowing hard as the object produced a loud clicking sound and soared away. Texans' caverns are fascinating. Because I despised winning and being hurried, I typically went alone. I disliked whiners and rushing. I could hike and cave all weekend. Out and dropped it near the caves at sunset. It was a giant orange ball over the desert. I took photos of the huge orange circle. I noticed it then. I assumed it was a mirage. It occurs in the desert due of heat waves. These ripples or dimples appear. I massaged my eyes, glanced away, and peered back. I noticed condor-sized wings. They flapped widely. It didn't move like a vulture or giant bird, which I found odd. As it drew closer, I saw peaks in its wings like a bat's and thought no way. Maybe it was a mutant fruit bat. The sun hadn't set yet, so the sky was growing darker, but it was still too bright to stare at the sun for long without being phased out. I glanced away, then returned, and it was still there and growing. I took photographs after lifting the camera. I hoped I could film in sunshine or twilight. As the sun set, the bat hovered. As the sun faded and night came, the bat lowered straight down. I observed a human-shaped corpse tumble to the desert floor. I watched as the light faded on something 100 yards distant. After a minute, it closed its wings and dove into the sand. As the sun set, the bat thing vanished like a mole. I believed sand had covered a fissure. Perhaps it visited a bat cave. I wanted an ATV. Rolling over to capture a photo of a world record bat, but I'm not sure what I saw and didn't know what I may stumble across. I began back down the rocks when I heard a cat-like cry coming from the caverns below. The sound became louder as I carefully made my way down. After about 10 steps, I heard this screeching sound coming from the fissure just beneath me. I was within 15 feet. What it was, it didn't sound pleased. I had just a knife and didn't know what I'd find. I've opted to conceal and wait for this to pass or show itself. I was startled when I heard a rattling, clicking sound in the gap. After 5 minutes of silence, I saw a beautiful lizard face. Yellow eyes and bighorn horns. Iran snorted and leant like a snake. Then I was soaring through the air for 10 to 20 feet before landing. I woke up and ran into cacti. When I leapt on I was bleeding. As I drove away, I passed the monster peering down from the cave hole. I sat there, wings folded, while I drove. We were professional caverns or bunkers, but we intended to journey in October. We heard they were gorgeous and wanted photos. Locals warned us to leave before dusk when we arrived late. He stated nighttime is unsafe. Nighttime creatures emerge. The caverns were natural and not gated or maintained, he cautioned. Expect to see snakes. I was concerned before we walked in because I assumed it would be peaceful, but we were warned about everything. Friends urged me to ignore him. Roger advised me to go to feel significant. That's all. We entered the caverns late in the afternoon, but it quickly grew dark. After a bend, we'd see additional outside light illuminate the path ahead. I would have had them hold flashlights while I shot cave photographs. Lovely. When we reached a ragged entrance, we shone our lights through and saw it dip and bend. Aaron started a hole, want to try. We pondered his conclusion. No one has been here in centuries. He persisted. We did. We turned off our headlamps and pointed back up the trail when I observed light below the fissure. Before turning on their lights, we admired a crack. We noticed an orange glow. Whoa! Asking sunset. Roger guessed another. 4 of us squeezed through the opening and saw webbed wings. They were 10 feet wide. Something was following us in the cave, and we heard it approaching. Erin's voice shook as he encouraged us to keep moving as the sound became closer. We escaped the cave, hurried to the vehicle, and stood there gasping. Roger remarked, "I guess he's having fun with us," and Aaron pointed back where we came from. "See?" Aaron remarked, "Do you notice his golden eyes?" I did, and we got in the automobile. Aaron aimed his light up and we saw a red alligator skin slide back into the blackness. I suspect something dwells in those caverns in Arizona's sun-baked desert. My cousins and I were camping a few years ago when we encountered something above the ordinary. We were simply going for a weekend camping trip up a little ways out of my cousin's property, which is miles outside of Alberta, Canada. My cousins and I wanted to go away for the weekend. Arriving to camp and putting up tents went well. We planned to grill a bunch of good food and drink a bunch of beer, but things took a turn when we heard weird screeching noises not too far away. We thought it was a weird bird or something, even though it didn't sound like a bird. It sounded really big, like a really big bird, squawking and making other noises. We simply assumed it was an animal and kept setting up camp. The remainder of the day and evening were typical. As the sun fell, my cousin and his buddy went into the woods to get firewood. My cousin and his companion hadn't been gone long when they ran back pale as a ghost, screaming that a Batman-like creature attempted to sweep them up. They showed me where they went to fetch wood and claimed a bird attempted to capture its companion and flew away. It was larger than him and his pal, he claimed. Initially, I thought he was pulling a prank on me, but as he continued, I realized he was truly afraid that something was wrong. My neck and arms became hairy and I felt unsafe. From that moment on, I have never believed in monsters or any of that foolishness, but it doesn't mean there aren't creatures we don't know exist that humans has yet to find. In my imagination, I'm picturing a big bat lives in the woods and tries to devour both of them. After about an hour, kids settle down and start having fun again, and we forget about the Batman issue. I went to buy firewood from a different place where they arrived and had no problems. 2 or 3 hours after my cousin's original incident, we began hearing the loud sounds again. It sounds like deep, bassy squawks. It's hard to explain. We were all on edge since this sounded so much like camp this time. Weird. We were meant to bring 2 tents, but we only had one, so we piled into both and called it a night with distant noise. I can't speak for my cousins and their acquaintance, but I had trouble sleeping. My cousin screamed, so my companion and I hurried out of our sleeping bags and opened the tent as soon as we could. My cousin, who had the event earlier, is shining a lamp up in a tree. I had to adjust my eyes, but he had a flashlight on a bat-like monster sitting 30 feet away staring at him. I've never seen an unattractive animal. It had gigantic, bulging red eyes, not flashing red eyes, but naturally red eyes, like some bats do, at least that's what it reminded me of, but they were so massive, the body appeared more humanoid, but its wings were tucked in and it had huge fangs from what we saw, its mouth looked open. My cousin barely had the light on it for a few seconds before it flew off into the darkness, but he wouldn't stop screaming and it continued staring. I told my cousins we were leaving immediately, so we all got up, loaded everything, and left in the middle of the night. I don't know if it was a gargoyle, a demon, or a demonic bat, but it scared my cousin and we didn't want to hang out any longer as we drove back. I asked him why he was out of his tent and he said he woke up in the middle of the night to pee and heard some shuffling in the tree beside him, so he flashed his flashlight and saw the monster. He thinks it was pursuing him all night, trying to grab him again. He kept saying he felt watched. Even though this occurred a while ago, my relative is still quite pale. We were all traumatized, to be honest. Hello, I have two unusual experiences to tell. I visited Arizona relatives. First, I was late night driving. I can't recall the specific route as this happened years ago, but it was dark as it typically is in Arizona, a night with no other traffic. The stars were out so there was some light outside, but my headlights were the main source of light. I'm driving when I saw a dark figure swoop from the sky to the road approximately 100 feet in front of me, then take off on 2 feet. It appeared like a dark shadow fell from the sky and rushed off the road. Fast. It was unclear if it had wings. I was terrified. When it swooped down, I slammed on my brakes and then saw it dart across the road. I stayed in my vehicle for a minute, not knowing what to do. I gathered the guts to keep driving, but it felt strange. The second experience I had occurred a few years later, near the Nevada border, in broad daylight, about 1 or 2 p.m. Others were driving. I observed a person hovering in the sky from my driver's side window. I double-checked. I thought it was a weather balloon. That may be human-shaped. This dark shadow appeared like a person standing motionless in the sky. Nothing moved or flapped. It was completely still. What's that? I struggled to not look and keep driving. I continued driving but kept checking to see if anything moved. Never moved. What was it? I was fascinated, so I did some research, and you wouldn't believe how much there is on these unusual incidents. Unidentified flying humanoids. YouTube has hundreds of footage showing what I observed. A human figure floats absolutely motionless in the sky. Inexplicably. Strange and frightening. I don't know what I saw or what they are. When I lived in Ohio, I lived outside of Dover and came home at night. My wife and kids were at home. Thankfully, I'm traveling on Highway 39 when a big figure with wings flies at my vehicle. First, I saw bright red eyes, then a giant object with wings flew towards my automobile. This monster soared towards me, charged, and then took off. I didn't hear or see anything before, but I nearly crapped my pants and drove off the road. It was brief. That gigantic thing with glowing eyes terrified me to death. I sped up and then heard an odd noise outside my driver's window. I didn't see anything, but my rearview mirror showed something following my car. As soon as I turned in the rearview mirror, I saw the illumination of two eyes not far behind my automobile and a low-flying outline shadow following my car. I panicked. I started weeping because a devil was coming to take me to hell. Panicked. I thought it would follow me home and murder my family. I detoured to attempt to lose it. After seeing it in the rearview mirror, I stopped looking to check whether it was still there. After 2 hours, I realized it wasn't behind me. I wasn't followed. I felt unsafe driving home, but I was weary. As I came into my driveway and stepped out of my vehicle, I felt I had no option. I looked everywhere, believing it was on my car or behind a tree. I never saw it again and never informed my wife and kids about what I saw that night. 7 years ago, I fell on bad things and had to move in with my grandpa in Virginia. My grandfather's acreage and woods were great for my then 6-year-old son to play in. I had recently lost my job and had nowhere else to go, so he asked me and my son to live on his property. An extra room was available. Everything went well. He had plenty of space and I saw it as a new start for me and my kid, or so I thought. We ended up sleeping in a room towards the end of the home, where you first saw the living room, kitchen, and a long corridor with 2 bedrooms closest to the living room. Then the bathroom. We remained in a bedroom at the left end of the corridor. My granddad was strict about staying inside after dark. I thought he was elderly and attempting to terrify my kid so he wouldn't get lost or bitten by animals. My kid lived outdoors, so I knew my grandpa wouldn't lie. Not impressed? First few evenings, my kid played outdoors a lot, but as it got dark, I brought him inside. I fell asleep watching TV in the bedroom not even a week after we moved home. My son starts crying hysterically, screaming, and freaking out, and of course I wake up freaking out. He points outside the window and says, "There's something trying to get him." I look out the window and my jaw drops and I freeze. Not even 10 feet away from the window is a gargoyle looking in right at us. This wicked lizard-like visage with burning red eyes. I believed we were gazing at a devil, so I grabbed my kid and raced out of the room to wake up my grandpa. My granddad was awake from my son's screams and was frightened about what was happening. I told him something was gazing at us outside the window, and he gave me his sternest look. He says nothing and rushes inside our room. He comes out a few minutes later claiming it's gone and attempts to calm my crying youngster. My kid falls asleep on the sofa with me and my grandpa at 2 a.m. My grandpa indicates for me to come with him and drags me into the garage. He thinks he's seen something nasty swooping over the woods and peeping into homes at night. He said he's only seen it at night and emphasized remaining indoors with all windows and drapes closed. I was horrified and shocked to see that. I didn't know how to feel. I stared and nodded. Morning after, I told my kid it was a horrible dream and we'd go stay someplace. Thankfully, I had a fantastic job offer a few towns away. I moved out with my grandpa a week afterwards. I shut the windows and closed the curtains the remainder of my stay there and never saw anything again. Also my son. I told him it was a horrible dream and he never addressed it again. After we relocated, my grandpa died 2 years later. If memory serves, his home was foreclosed. When I look back, it terrifies me because he was sure a demon was coming for him. He informed me this animal had wings, could fly, and wanted him. He told me he would catch this thing stalking him and staring up at him from the trees as he would sometimes get home in the evening. Whatever it was haunted him and that property till the day he died, or one could only assume hopefully it's not still lurking in the property area. Not me but seen by my brother who is a truck driver late last August while doing a route through Minnesota. He saw what he describes as a bat-human hybrid. He reported the object soared 100 yards in front of his vehicle, then returned to the sky. Said the creature's body seemed odd. From its appearance, he dubbed it a failed scientific experiment. He couldn't see the face because it flew into the road, but it had a horse-like head, he claimed. The body was black, hairy, and had bat-like wings on the back. Also, no tail. Said it was fast. It flew out in front of his vehicle and landed as far away as a huge truck. Weight and momentum won't let you halt. To slow down, he slammed on the brakes. As he was, the object flew off. He's still baffled by what he witnessed and thinks it was an escaped government experiment. I took my folks out to supper after getting a new job and becoming wealthy. I wanted to treat my folks. We went to a beautiful restaurant where my dad drank great wine and passed out in the backseat as I drove. My mum was in the passenger seat and I was driving. As we turn a corner, we see a demon-looking bat monster. My headlights illuminated it, and my mother and I saw it before it disappeared. When my headlights spotted this creature on the side of the highway, my mother and I both gasped. It was devouring a dead deer on the side of the road. Deer again. We passed it on the way to the restaurant, so I know it's fresh. Once my headlights struck it, it stood up and flew away. My mum panicked as it stood up, asking what it was before it flew away. I feared about our automobile. I slowed down before it flew off. It was somewhat hairy and covered with dark brown light. It was around 4 to 5 feet tall, with bat-like wings with a membrane, and fluttered a few times before flying off. It had no ears, a small nose, and large teeth, but no ears. Eyes were blurry. I was 30 feet away and everything occurred in 5 to 10 seconds, so I noticed many details. Its feet were obscured by the dead deer. It has long, white-clawed arms. I'm not sure whether it had hands, but I recall it having blood on its lips and chest from eating roadkill. My mom and I gazed at one another, unsure what to do or say, so I continued driving. My dad was still knocked out, so he didn't know my mother and I kept it a secret from him. Work keeps me so busy all the time. I've always been curious about supernatural things. And I've had a similar experience. My experience isn't like many of the ones I read or hear about online. Before anyone says anything, it's not that it's too crazy or anything, it's just that I have real proof, which you can see in the pictures I've attached to this email. Please keep in mind. This is a zoomed-in picture taken in the woods of West Virginia with an iPhone 6. Anyway, my meeting happened in 2017 in the West Virginia mountains. What people say about West Virginia is really true. It's crazy and great. Just a little bit about myself. I am one of the managers at the Walmart in West Virginia where I live. I don't want to say what town I'm from because I still work there and I'm sending you pictures of what I saw. I'm not sure. I just don't want it to bother people or let them find out who I am. I'm sorry if that sounds strange. So, I'd like it if you didn't tell anyone my name or email address. I grew up in West Virginia, and the Appalachians have always been my favorite place to go hiking and camping. Since I was a kid, I've been doing it. My dad would always take me and my brothers camping. It was one of the things we liked to do together the most. Now that I'm 31, I still love the hiking camp. I try to go a few times a year at least. Most of the time, I go with my friends or brothers, but sometimes I go by myself. I like to get away from everyone and just enjoy nature. My job is a lot of work. Since Walmart is always very busy. I work a lot, so when I go camping by myself, I sometimes just need to take a break. It has been so nice. I don't mind being alone or having time to think. I do, in fact, talk to myself a lot. I know that sounds weird, but let's just say I'm fine on my own. In fact, one of my favorite shows is on the History Channel. It's called Alone. I began to learn about bushcraft. Having seen that show, I've been going to the same place since I was a kid. In the Appalachian Mountains, that's about an hour's walk from the nearest road. It's in a very remote part of the state, and I've never seen anyone else there. It's one of my favorite places in the world. In August 2017, I was planning a 2-night trip by myself to my favorite place. Just in case I wanted to stay longer, I brought enough food for 3 or 4 days. On Friday, I hiked in and set up my camp. I spent the rest of the day relaxing and getting to know the area. I didn't notice or hear anything strange. I wasn't looking for anything, but I have to tell you because you'll see why in a minute. I went to bed early that night because I wanted to get up early the next day. I wanted to go hiking, but I was too tired because I had worked for half a day and then hiked all the way out to my favorite spot. That evening, in the middle of the night, I was woken up by a loud noise that sounded like something was running through the woods. I stood up in my tent to listen, but I didn't hear anything else. I thought it must have been an animal, so I went back to sleep. I've seen a few black bears while camping here, which is kind of scary, but they usually run away when you make noise. I also always have bear spray and my 357 with me. A few hours later, the same noise woke me up again. This time, it seemed like something was in the trees from the sound. Something was going on up above me. I got my flashlight and went outside to see what was going on. At first, I didn't see anything, so I shone the light up into the trees. Then I saw a big black-winged creature with big red eyes just sitting in a tree. This thing was covered in black fur and feathers and had to be about 5 feet tall. It had skinny legs and wings that were almost as big as the rest of its body. Now, I've been coming to these woods since I was a little boy, and I've never seen anything like this. I can tell you it wasn't a bird, and it scared the hell out of me, to put it mildly. I didn't say anything or make any noise. I just backed slowly into my tent and closed the zipper. I just sat there for a while, trying to figure out what I had just seen. Then I hear it leave the ground. I opened the tent back up and shined my flashlight up at the same spot, but it was gone. I was almost tempted to just pack up my things and walk away. But it was the middle of the night, and I didn't want to walk out in the dark. I just went right back to sleep. After sitting there for an hour, I was so tired that I couldn't do anything but sleep. That night, I didn't hear anything else. The next morning, I got up early and got ready for the hike I had planned for the day. As soon as I start my hike, I see the same creature land about 50 yards away in the woods. I got to within 20 feet of my tent. When this happened, I stopped and pulled out my cell phone right away. I was able to photograph this thing twice. The first was when I took out my phone and zoomed in to take this picture. It's the first file I've sent with an email. When it landed, it was facing the other way. It looked like it had grabbed something from the ground and was eating it. I moved a little and stepped on some twigs, and it turned around and looked right at me. Now, I wish I had a picture of that, but to say the least, it scared me. I wasn't sure if this thing would attack me or not. I put my hand on the arm on my side. Then it screams very loudly and sharply, like a bird of prey, turns around, and flies away. As it was flying away, I was able to take this picture, which I really like. It was probably about 20 feet in the air when it took off. When I took that picture, it flew out of the small hole you can see in the trees in the background. So far, I've seen this thing twice and didn't want to touch it. This thing might have rabies or other diseases. I spent the next hour getting my camp ready to leave, and then I started hiking away. I didn't want to end my camping trip early because I need that time to relax and enjoy nature. But I'm not going to stay at my campsite as long as that thing is there. Since I found a few other places to camp, I haven't been back to that area, and I haven't gone camping alone again either. Over the years, I've only camped with my friends and brothers. I've only shown these pictures to a few of my closest friends and my brothers. The Mothman is the subject of a story. I know you've talked about it on your channel before. I can say for sure that it is true. There is no other way to explain what I saw that day in the woods. What other animal is 5 feet tall, has big red eyes, and wings? Thanks for telling people about me. Let me know what you think about that in the comments below. I have to say that it's the most convincing encounter I've had so far, and I've always said that if I get pictures, I'll show them to everyone. My good friend Josh from What Lurks Beneath is telling the next story. The link to his channel is below. First of all, I'm a Christian, and things like skinwalkers and people who can change their appearance remind me of what the Bible calls demons. All I ever knew about demons was what I saw in movies. I saw the movie The Exorcist and thought, I don't think that kind of thing happens today. Well, that all changed when I met a skinwalker in the Val Kilmer movie Thunderheart, which is where I first heard the term. The people who live there call them Ye Need Lu Shi, which means with it. He gets down on his knees. The Navajo wish you beautiful walking. Native American legends tell of shape-shifting, man-eating monsters called Sioux, which are real and mean big elder brother in their own language. During the summer of 1995, this happened. I led a group of young people from Boulder, Colorado, on a 2-week mission trip to the Lakota Pine Ridge Reservation to work at the mission there. What an adventure it ended up being. The native people who live close to the mission used the well every day. The main gate to the mission would be locked at night, and no one was allowed in. So, they would come early every morning and wait in line outside the main gate until it was unlocked so they could bathe and fill water containers. It seems that their homes did not have running water. We were told that some of the natives had taken the plumbing pipes out of their homes and sold them for money. During our first week at the missions, nothing really big happened. We went to different schools and held vacation Bible schools there. Some of the young people signed up to give out candy at the local hospital. Others helped fix things that needed fixing at the mission. During this week, I became friends with one of the tribe's elders who was also a Christian. We seemed to get along well, and he liked that I had read a book about Chief Sitting Bull's life as well as Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. I told him I was horrified that the army had killed so many innocent, native people. I even took a youth group to the site of the Wounded Knee massacre and prayed for our country to change. Because of this, an elder asked me if I wanted to see the Braves' sacred pole dance initiation, which no white person had ever been allowed to see. I said yes to this right away. And on the day of the dance, we drove his old station wagon to the place where everyone was meeting. Just before we got there, he told me to hide in the back of the car under some blankets and stay there. When we got there, there were about 50 cars parked in a small area. He parked in the back of the parking lot at an angle that let me see the pole in a small space between the other cars. It looked like there were more than 100 people there. He got out of the car and told me to stay low and out of sight. I could see out the side window of the station wagon, and the blankets kept me from being seen. I watched for what seemed like an hour or so from the back of the car. I watched the Braves do the run the pole dance. Some people had an animal bone tied to rawhide thongs and put through their chests. The thongs were tied to the center pole. They started to move backwards from the pole so they could pull the bone out of their own chests. I could hear the whistling, and the sounds of chants. The braves were making a noise. Under the blankets, it got pretty hot, and I had to lift them up from time to time to let air in. Then I saw the older man running toward the car. The way he looked told me something was wrong. He quickly got in the car, yelled at me to stay still while he started the car, and told me we had to leave quickly. It was dangerous. Someone had seen me and told everyone else about it. If I broke this sacred rite, they might beat me up or even kill me if they caught me. I thought he had put his foot down because I could see clouds of dust flying behind us as we left the area. He even went faster. Once we were back on the blacktop road, we drove quickly back to the mission. A few nights after the ceremony, a sound outside the bunkhouse woke me up. I got up to see what was going on, and when I looked out the window, I saw a man standing there. He didn't have any clothes on, and his skin was as dark as coal. His eyes were bright red, and his teeth were sharp. I ran to wake the missionary up because I didn't want to scare the kids. When I told him what I had seen, he said I had described what the natives call a skinwalker, which is similar to Navajo but more specifically a bad shapeshifter. After this happened, things started to get strange. The bunkhouse at the mission was where our group stayed. Every night, we would have a bonfire, roast marshmallows, and sing worship songs. On this night in particular, about 15 of us were sitting around the fire when we all heard what sounded like a woman screaming. It seemed to come from the area outside the mission compound. We all turned around and looked at each other. Then someone said it was just the wind, but we kept hearing it, and it sounded like it was coming from the direction of the old cemetery. Now, the cemetery is only about 100 yards from the bunkhouse, but there is only one way in and one way out of the compound. As we got close to the cemetery, we all got our flashlights and decided to go check it out. The screaming just got louder and louder, and it sounded like someone was being hurt. We couldn't see anything when we shined our flashlights in that direction. As we got closer to the cemetery's entrance, the screams stopped. We all just stood there for a few seconds because we didn't know what to do. Then we heard something from the other side of the cemetery running towards us. We all turned around and ran as fast as we could back to the mission compound. When we got back to the missionaries, we told them what had happened. They said we were probably just hearing things because it was late at night. But it happened again and again the next night, and the night after that, one of the missionaries said we needed to check it out. So he gets a flashlight and a Bible and walks to the cemetery. When we heard him screaming, he had been gone for about 10 minutes. When we got to the cemetery, the missionary was lying on the ground just outside the entrance. He was shaking and sweating, and his eyes were wide open. We asked him what happened, and he said that he saw something in the cemetery that he couldn't explain. He said it was a man, but it was different from any other man he had ever seen. When he told us about it, he said the man was naked and had skin as dark as coal. He also said the man's eyes were red and that his teeth were sharp like a shark's. The missionary said that the man started to chase him out of the cemetery, and he thought he saw it change into a wolf man. He was afraid it would catch him and tear him apart. But as soon as he got out of the cemetery, he turned around to see if it was still following him, and that's when it disappeared or vanished into thin air. Then he tripped and fell, which is where we found him. We prayed and tried to figure out what had happened all night long. We go to the cemetery the next day to see if there are any signs of what the missionary saw. There were footprints on the soft ground, but they were different from any footprints we had ever seen. They reminded me more of animal prints. Strange handprints were also on the ground and on the tombstones. We didn't know what to think, but I was sure that what the missionary and I had seen was real and bad. After what happened, we all started to pay more attention to our surroundings and notice that strange things were happening on the res. We would see people walking through the woods, but when we got too close, they would vanish. At night, we would hear strange noises and see lights far away that moved and changed shape. We began feeling like we were being watched and we would feel scared. Now, we went to town a few days later to get some supplies. When we got back, the missionary told us that he had talked to some elders, who told him that a shapeshifter had been seen on the reservation. Long story short, we all got scared and left early because we didn't want to stay any longer. If we had stayed longer, I don't know what we would have done. I don't know what would have happened or what we would have seen. I will always remember that summer and what I saw on the Lakota reservation. What I saw was real, and I know it was something bad. I hope I never have to see something like that again.